these things are going to do what a belt is supposed to do. And they do it nicely. They do it with class. They do it. They're beautiful pieces of workmanship. And let's talk about what goes into these two things. All right. Let's talk about the easy one first. What is this single ply belt made out of?
This is made out of a type of top grain leather called sole leather, and it's cut from the bend, which is a section of the hide that runs along the backbone of the animal. I guess first, maybe the best thing to do would be back up and talk about
talk about the grades of leather. And this is a top grain.
This is a top grain. So you can think of the cowhide as basically 3 separate layers. So the outermost layer is called the full grain, and that's got all of the imperfections.
So you've got a cross section of hide, maybe this thick.
Yeah, maybe an inch thick, maybe a little more, a little less.
Really, an inch thick.
Yeah.
The hide on the back of a steer, especially on the back of a bull, is very, very thick. It's that way for protection from the elements, from fights, from ornery creatures jumping on his back in the middle of Africa, that sort of thing.
Right.
And people are surprised at how thick leather is, how thick the section of a hide is that comes off an animal. And it's very, very thick. And it's thickest along the spine at the shoulders. Mm-hmm. That's where it's thickest. Yeah. In fact, if you'll remember, back from your history lessons, the Indians used to make buffalo rawhide shields. Remember this little target-sized shields out of the shoulder hide of a buffalo. Mm-hmm. And when those things they would cut those things to shape from that piece of hide, and they would dry them, and they'd shrink and contract, and you had a piece of material that was 1.5 inches thick that would turn a bullet if you were clever enough to get it in the way.
That's the trick.
That's the trick. Putting it between you and the bullet.
Yeah.
So people aren't familiar with how thick that hide is, but so the first layer is called.
That's the full grain.
The full grain.
Yeah, so the tannery's going to get the hide in, and they're going to first split that full grain layer off, and they're going to take a look at it. If it's a really high grade, so there's not a lot of imperfections, defects, it's just got a nice natural grain, or they can tell that it will have a nice natural grain after the tanning process, it'll go on and just become something usually called like aniline leather or something like that. It's going to be like the highest end couches, handbags, stuff like that are made from that full grain leather.
And this is where they want to show the texture of the
they want that actual
the
leather
pores
grain.
And the obvious surface features that are on a piece of land. This is called full grain.
Full grain.
So if you see full grain cowhide, this is the top layer of the skin.
Right. And the times where they just take it and put, a transparent dye or something like that, it's very rare. I've read that only a few percent of hides, like maybe about 3% of all hides, can be done in that manner, just because there's so many imperfections that you'll have in a hide.
And what are imperfections? Scratches from fights and holes.
Scratches, warts, scars, branding marks, even just
unpleasantries.
Yeah, even just damage that happened to it after it was taken off the animal, just in transport and everything. So that's the top grain leather. Now, something about the top grain leather and the full grain and the top grain, which is the next layer down, is they have the same, I guess you'd call it fiber structure. Mm-hmm. So both of these layers have fibers that are very densely packed, very tightly woven together, and they make a very durable product as a result. So it's something that's not going to wear out and break over time. It's going to wear in and just develop character and things like that. There's one more layer down that after the full grain is split off, after the top grain is split off, you have something that's just called split leather. And this is down the hide far enough so that those fibers are no longer as densely packed. Mm-hmm. They're both further apart and less intertwined. So you've got something that is very flexible, but is not going to have near the durability that a top grain product is going to have. So they take the split leather and they make suede out of it, garment upholstery type
So
stuff.
it's inherently more flexible.
Inherently more flexible, but for a weightlifting belt, not really the material you'd want to use.
Right, because it's also, in addition to being flexible this way, it's also stretchy.
Right.
And when we wear a belt, we wear it for the specific purpose of not yielding to pressure.
Yeah, the only thing I haven't done is, send a sample off to a lab and have them do like an Instron pull test of a cross section of this versus a cross section of the split to see what that tensile strain would be for a given load. Just from holding pieces in your hands and moving them, it's got to be an order of magnitude at least, because this stuff is not noticeable, but a split you can stretch.
Right. So to recap, we have full grain, which is when you want the visual effect of the pores and the surface features of a natural hide.
Right.
Then you have the top grain, which is the same structural density as the full grain, but with a smooth, even finish like this, because it's a cut.
Right.
There's
been a layer split off of that.
Layer taken off, and then you have the split, which is the flimsy stuff that we're not interested in for belts.
Right. Which is not to say people don't use it on belts. And a lot of those cheap belts that you'd find on Amazon or coming from overseas, they make them out of that split leather because it's cheap.
Right.
Right. It's very inexpensive. And it'd probably work for a month. Or so.
Yeah, it might, or until you got up to 135. Yeah. And I wonder if perhaps split leather was the reason that people started making belts in 2 and 3 ply. I don't know. It just occurs to me that maybe that was their answer for having to use cheap materials to make a belt out of.
There are definitely belts that do that. Like one of our belts we have is it has this same piece of leather on the inside and then suede on both sides, just a standard double suede belt.
Right.
And we don't put any edge paint on it or anything. We like to see that nice leather edge and stuff. Other manufacturers will take a piece of split leather, substitute it in for the top grain, put the suede on it, edge paint it, and then they'll go in and dye the holes and inside the buckle area brown so that you wouldn't know, or unless you cut into it, you wouldn't know that you didn't actually have what you thought you had.
How about that? Very clever of them, huh?
Well, we outsmarted them.
Well, good. What now? You mentioned sole leather. So we go from terminology that involves the description of the source of the leather from the hide,
right,
to end purpose of the leather.
Right.
Right? So sole leather is what?
Shoe sole leather. So this was originally developed to be durable enough to be worn on the bottom of your foot. You walk around on it all day on whatever, and it's going to hold up.
And it's top grain usually, right?
It's top grain. All shoe sole leather is going to be top grain. You can't make it out of a split.
Right.
And what makes it sole leather then is the tanning process that happens after we split this into the 3 layers and do any other pre-processes to it.
Right.
Sole bend in particular goes through a process after
sole bend, is that another? It's synonymous with the.
It ends up being used interchangeably because typically the cut of the hide that the sole leather is made from is the bend. So people.
And where's the bend?
The bend runs down the back of the animal.
Right.
Yeah,
right. You mentioned that.
Yeah, right along the spine.
Up high,
down
the flank, toward the posterior of the animal.
Right.
That's called the bend.
Yes.
Okay?
And that term just ends up being used interchangeably when you hear shoe sole leather, sole bend.
Okay.
People say that.
Right.
You can make sole leather out of a shoulder. It's just people tend not to do it for whatever reason.
It's probably too thick.
It could be.
It could be too thick, and I guess if it's got to have some sole leather must have some degree of flexibility, or you couldn't walk into things.
Yeah, and that's another part of the tanning process where they make this in different tempers. They make firm, they make semi-flexible, they make flexible. So for this guy, just part of the process that makes it shoe sole leather is the compression that they do to it after it's tanned. So where the fibers were already extremely densely packed, they're now even more so.
How do they do that?
So they'll run it through some rollers that compress the material, or
so
they'll
it's
put
actually
it in a giant
it's
press.
actually mashed.
It's mashed
flatter,
together. Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
and they'll pack
and it
oils
stays mashed.
Yeah.
You can make it denser with the pressure. Is that right?
That's one of the properties of leather that is vegetable tanned, which sole bend is that it will take a set. So if you stamp it or something like that, it will be permanent. Or if you just compress the whole thing, as far as you can compress it, it'll hold that set.
So temper refers to the flexibility of the finished leather.
Correct. Yes.
And it comes in 3 or 4 different grades.
Yeah, firm, semi-flexible, and flexible are the ones I've seen. Depending
what is
on this is semi-flexible.
Semi-flexible.
Yeah.
Why don't you use